Hi, my name's Darren Harvey Regan. I'm here giving a talk today at the Belfast Photo Festival. The talk's going to be about my practice as part of the themes of convergence with other kind of art disciplines. My practice looks at photography and its interrelationship with sculpture and the sort of conflation of the two-dimensional and the three-dimensional. So I'm going to be talking about that today. You can look up my work, harveyregan.com is my website, and come along, look it up, listen, whatever. Is this good for microphone levels? Everyone can hear? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to kind of pitch pretty much straight in with a work that was a bit of a sort of pivotal work for me. By way of a little bit of background, I studied photography down in the University of Plymouth. I lived on the edge of Dartmoor. And when I came to the Royal College of Art, my portfolio consisted largely of sort of landscape photography. But I was looking at landscape from the idea that landscape is a sort of constructed idea in the sense that there's only really land, and landscape sort of denotes a human perspective of what is out there. It's a way of labeling and describing something. So my portfolio was sort of about sort of photography that was kind of connected to landscape and the construction of the idea of landscape. And I followed that through in my MA by sort of doing more about sort of extending that into the idea of the animal and the idea of like naming and language, and how the animal is something that exists in its own right, and the way that we talk about the animal is all essentially sort of projection from our side of things. So like, we sort of construct the idea of the animal, we give it names that it doesn't obviously have of its own. So that kind of led to sort of all throughout my MA was sort of generally focusing on the animal and ways of sort of language and representation. And this was sort of one of my final pieces in my MA show. And it's kind of interesting sort of where you kind of come to something from and what you take away from it from, because though I was sort of working on the animal, like what I actually sort of took away from this is something kind of different. So essentially this is a taxidermy starling. It's this photograph of a taxidermy starling. And then the photograph hangs on the wall, and the taxidermy starling sort of appears to look in its own reflection. The thing that I kind of took away from this is the fact that I left the photograph, as you can hopefully see there, it's a free hanging sort of photograph. It's just pinned and it hangs down. It's not mounted on anything, but it gives the illusion of being a mirrored surface. Yet at the same time you can see it's a paper surface. I deliberately at the time I didn't mount it on anything, so and it wasn't about sort of making a kind of trick. It was about the photograph being sort of in two kind of places at once, if you like. You kind of look at it and you see the image, and at the same time you see the sort of paper object of the photograph. So you're very conscious that you're looking at something that's't, but is also sort of giving you the illusion of, like the window, the sort of photographic invisibility of the photographic image. It was something that I made a few variations on this because there's an edition of 5, so there's a couple of other variations with different birds. It was a lot of fun to do, and also there was just as a brief aside one in the MA show. I had a few people come up and do this kind of thing in between the image and the bird, which is very satisfying. And one person who actually came up during the MA show when I was kind of loitering around my work, as you kind of slightly tend to do and pretend you're not doing. One disgruntled punter kind of came around the show and sort of stopped by this, and she stood there and she looked at it for a while and went, "Is that all it does? You call this an MA show?" and sort of stormed off. I have no idea what she was expecting. So for me, this idea of I wanted to stop working on the animal. I've done pretty much 2 years of sort of animal work and kind of painted myself into a corner. But I was interested in the way that the kind of the photograph. The object of the photograph, the sort of materiality of the photographic object, and sort of, so that's why I sort of took into this sort of the next kind of piece that I made, this piece called The Holt, which is a photograph of an axe, and then the axe itself, the one from the photograph, embeds the photograph to the wall. It's a very satisfying piece to make if you've got the right kind of wall and so that you can sort of slam the axe through the photograph. There has been sort of occasions where I've turned up to install this in a show, and I've been told they've got the right kind of wall, and it turns out to be concrete, which is the wrong kind of wall. There's something interesting about that, the encounter of the two-dimensional, three-dimensional here. And sort of, I think a lot of my work has been about sort of bringing things together to kind of see what happens, to see what sort of thoughts it generates. There's a line I like about sort of using using work to sort of think with rather than to sort of necessarily think about. So sort of to bring objects, to bring things into sort of encounter and see what goes on. With this particular thing, what I thought was kind of interesting, one of the things obviously about photography is its relationship to time and it being an image of something past. On this particular occasion, it's like the object slams through the photograph is like there in the present moment, it feels like it has no time left. It's not about the past, it's always about the present, and I think that was something, that certainly interested me. And also what happens here, I think you can see the sort of shadow of the shadow of the object itself sort of appears in the photograph as almost like an additional sort of part of the image, and turns the material of the photograph into a sort of sculptural object. And that's something that I then sort of carried through into this work, Grounds of Doubt, which is a photograph of a massive boulder which hangs. It's inside a frame, it's sort of glass framed, but that's sort of the bottom of the photograph curls up. And so you've got a sort of similar thing going where the emphasis on what's in the image is at kind of odds with the sort of materiality of the photograph itself as a paper object, with the kind of curl at the bottom. I was influenced quite a lot by sort of Magritte in the way that he kind of, within the context of the image, sort of showed like floating rocks and things that sort of portrayed things that in a way that they go against their own sort of materiality. But what I wanted to do here was to use this sort of sim idea, but use the actual sort of makeup of the photograph as an object to do that. The title Grounds of Doubt refers to that idea of in painting where you have a figure in the ground, and the ground being sort of like the background of the figure being the thing that sort of comes in front, but here like the grounds being the actual sort of material of the object, is the paper photographic object itself. And then sort of similar sort of thing going on here with a photograph of a saw that's sort of cut down the middle. And here you get this sort of peeling apart of the paper, but obviously the sort of sense of the peeling feels like it belongs both to the image, it belongs to the blade, there's a sense of the blade peeling apart, but it's also a sense of the paper peeling apart. So a kind of conflation of the image and its sort of material properties as an image, as a photographic image. And sort of in contrast to the one before, here you've got the kind of the paper sort of peeling out of the frame. Sense of sort of framing it, but at the same time the sense of it kind of coming out of the frame, whereas beforehand the lip of this one down here, this is glassed across the front, so the paper kind of curls up and just touches the glass. It's a sense that the glass of the frame contains the object of the photograph. It's a pain in the arse though, this one. It's sort of stuck in this massive cardboard box now because I can't sort of basically move it anywhere without sort of crumpling it. So I never want to do a work like that again. This is sort of more kind of playful approach in this one of like sort of switching kind of places between the what's expected of the photograph as an object and the actual object. So thinking also of the framed photograph as an object, not just the frame as something that houses the photograph, but the sort of the whole thing as being like an object in itself. A lot of my work is still life objects, and I think there's a very interesting translation in the fact that you have the photograph is an object, and photographs of objects are objects in themselves. So often we kind of forget what we're looking at, I think, when we look at a photograph. We forget the sort of materiality of the thing itself as a kind of constructed thing. And we look through a photograph, it's like a mirror into a sort of another space, but we look through it and we don't sort of stop at it. So especially the frame photograph being sort of not necessarily thought about as an object in itself. So in this occasion I want to sort of exchange the kind of places. The rock in the image is the same rock that hangs on the wall. There's no sort of attempt this time to actually put them in direct relationship with each other in the sense that they don't sort of mirror each other. One is very clearly an image, and the rock is a lot bigger, it's in a different kind of angle, all that kind of thing. There's the rock on the wall. And an interesting sort of particular point for this one was that it's a rock that I had in my studio that I'd photographed. I made the image a little while before this sort of full idea sort of came, and the rock itself had been used as a prop, if you like, for this picture. And then when the idea came to use the rock as the fuller part of the work, suddenly this thing that had been kind of being kicked around my studio was like going to take on sort of hallowed, sacred status of an artwork in itself. And so it's like, oh my god, I need to look after that. It had like ink stains on it, it had been scratched, it had been used as a kind of doorstop. And then I elevated it to the status of art and had to actually go about retouching it and sort of like scraping some ink off and retouching in real life. It's like I don't really do any, none of the work is sort of digital or retouched, all the work is kind of analog, but the real objects are retouched. Well, this one was. This piece is called Very Similars, I think. There's a collection of work around sort of this time where I was kind of working on the idea that there was sort of three components within the work generally. There was like the originary object in the world, the thing that I actually photographed. There was the image, like the sort of dematerialized image, if you like, and then there was the sort of photographic, the material object of the photograph itself. And a lot of the work kind of like sort of brought kind of relationships, brought encounters of those three things together, sort of mixed them around. This particular one is a sort of vitrine, and you've got there's a fossil on the left, a photograph of the exact same fossil on the right next to it, a seemingly random picture of oranges, and this from a children's book. I was thinking of sort of the idea of what it is that you're actually looking at as the photograph as an object. So the idea that what looks the most similar, the thing that is like we obviously deal in appearances and surfaces, and photography is a language of appearances, and it speaks the same kind of language that we do in that sense. So the immediate thing that looks the most similar, obviously, is the photograph of the fossils and the fossils. In reality, obviously, they're not the same at all. One's paper, one's minerals. They're completely different. And the two things in the picture that are the two things in the work are actually the closest, sort of, as far as their kind of chemical components and everything else about them are the two photographs. It's only their appearances that make us think that they're very different things. It's a kind of playful take on that one. And I've been collecting a lot of these children's books. I don't know how old people are, but these are all those ladybird books that are some of the things that I learned to read with and learned to count with. And this is one of those little cute, sort of very non-designed books of its day. And there's a picture of the whole thing on the wall as a vitrine. If there are questions, by the way, because I will babble, but you can ask them at the same time. So this is one of the books that made it into the exhibition from my collection, also How Many Bricks. It's one of those kind of one of those sort of pictures that just became kind of slightly fascinating and kind of stuck with me for quite a while. Kept coming back to it, thinking I love that picture. I didn't really know exactly why, but I love that picture. And wanted to make a work on it. I wanted to kind of think about this sort of relationship with the physical and the two-dimensional and the three-dimensional. So I wanted to kind of think on this one. If say photographs could kind of speak, if it could kind of quote, what would a quotation, how would you kind of re-quote that in a photograph? And so I recreated that image using like MDF blocks and MDF backgrounds, which photograph as kind of very straight, very flat surfaces, thinking that it was almost like if a surface could kind of talk and recreate and re-quote that sort of image. And then at the same time, if like a solid could talk and re-quote that image. So I made it also in concrete. Which I was really pleased with myself for doing, although I never really got the kind of recognition it deserves, because it's one whole kind of set piece. It's not 7 concrete blocks stacked. The whole thing is like one solid, which took God knows how long to work out, and I don't think anyone cared except me, because it just seemed really important. It was like one solid, and so there's like 5 pictures of it to prove how good it is. But what I really liked about this was that this book here, How Many Bricks, like it's a sort of instructional thing for kids. It's like saying it's one of these learn to count books, but also sort of underlying that is essentially that children are being kind of taught how to read images, because there's no bricks. It's a picture, it's a representation, it's an illustration. There are no bricks, but that's obviously not the question really being asked. But that's the sort of underlying thing that you're sort of being taught from early ages, how how to actually immediately sort of recognize imagery, recognize a representation. And so the answer to the question in the work as well, between the sort of the physical concrete blocks and the sort of surface representation, is technically there are no bricks. Obviously that's pedantic, but you know what I mean. And as a link to the photo essays that we were talking about before, is a work that was inspired by Walker Evans' photo essay when he was picture editor of Fortune magazine back in 1955. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with his images, which are awesome. So there was 5 images called Beauties of the Common Tool, and I thought what was really interesting about these is, I'm still not sure whether I'm right about this, but I'll pitch it out there, and if anyone knows I'm wrong, they can tell me afterwards. I can't think of any sort of earlier occasions when there's an attempt to sort of, I'm not sure if this is what he was necessarily doing either, but to make the photograph almost sort of transparent. If you stood above these images, and if you stood above the actual objects and you looked down on them from where the camera was, they would look pretty much exactly the same, except for the black and whiteness, obviously. So there's a sort of sense that you're being shown the image and the object sort of simultaneously. They're as true to life as you could make them. They're as kind of photographically composed. They don't use the kind of the sort of tropes of photography, soft focus, jazzy compositions, anything like that. They are just sort of direct representations of these objects. So they have that sort of, they have a very direct relationship to the object itself. And I was fascinated by these, and initially started sort of making compositions using his images just in Photoshop, and slicing them up and mocking them together and sort of like reforming these sort of tools. And then and the work eventually became sort of from his 5 images and from the kind of these mock-ups that I made, to recreate those in real life, and to find tools that matched his tools, and to have them kind of physically cut in half and then rejoin them and photograph them. So that they take on the appearance of a property of the image, if you like, a property of the image being like of a montage, something you can slice together, but actually this is the real life, like photographed. So it's that sense of overlap between what's a property of the image and what's a property of the object and a property of the world. Usually you have the trajectory being photographed, kind of make an image out of something in the world. I thought was kind of interesting is to sort of try and reverse that trajectory here, to make objects out of the images. So there's a series of 5 of these, and yeah, they're all cut in half as sort of water jet cutting, which is very precise, and then joined back together. A lot of them, obviously, like particularly this one, which is a trowel and a spanner. The trowel is kind of like that shaped, and the spanner is that shaped. So they only actually like join at either end in real life, and again, it's sort of the forced perspective of the photograph. It kind of recreates them as a sort of possibility that don't actually really exist. Kind of do and don't in that sense. And that's sort of part of that's the presentation of those. There's something kind of interesting when I was looking into how to like finally present them and the size that they had to go up. I put them on a projector in my studio wall and was trying to decide, should these be this size like the tool, or should they sort of be massive and impressive, sort of, and all that kind of. And something I found that I've sort of noted before when you're sort of trying to do objects, like the sort of proximity there, and something sort of physical as a sort of image size, its actual relationship to sort of me as an embodied person. There's a point where these sort of, I think the actual object in the image is about this big. As soon as it got just a bit more, it felt like they became like kind of posters, and there was no sense of sort of physicality in relationship to me being able to kind of hold them as objects. It's an interesting kind of lesson that I felt like I learned there, sort of like a kind of relationship of something as it appears to you, and in its relationship to me, sort of determined as to whether the thing appeared as like a poster or as an object. So I went to about the maximum size that I could, where they still felt like they had a kind of embodied relationship to me. And I kind of went a bit bigger than I would have done if they were, because I wanted people to sort of see the sort of constructedness of them, like that there are, you might not be able to see it entirely, but when you look at the actual prints, you can see sort of down the edges sometimes where they don't align properly. Because my intention isn't to just sort of trick people into kind of, ideally I don't want them to think I Photoshop something, even though obviously it has the language of something that's image programs and things. It didn't totally work because they were sort of done a bit better than I had anticipated, in the sense that I didn't think I could do them that well, and apparently I did, and a lot of people thought they were Photoshopped anyway. The magazine was also part of the exhibition to sort of show that kind of process. This is another sort of set of work that follows a sort of similar-ish idea in using something that's a property of Photoshop. That if anyone works in Photoshop, you'll know that there's a kind of checkerboard space. When there's no information in Photoshop, you get a sort of empty checkerboard space to denote sort of nothing there. It won't print. Similarly to on your mobile phones when they're loading, sometimes you just get a kind of a no information kind of pattern. So I painted the no information pattern onto these objects and photographed them, so that from the perspective of the camera, the pattern becomes sort of two-dimensional. So similarly, what you have is at first appearances, along like with the montage ones. The first thing you know appears to be a property of the image, whereas in actual fact it's a property of the object itself. And it's like coming closer to the objects and realizing sort of what's gone on shows that. It took ages. It was when the Olympics were on and everyone was out having a good time. I was sitting in the studio painting tiny squares on things for ages. And I kind of left wasn't like totally deliberate, but at the same time I'm glad it's there. So like imperfections on the plinths and things that I could have touched out, sanded and made perfect, but I like the kind of, there are sort of vague imperfections on these, but it's like I said, I'm not sort of trying to fool people into thinking that like I could have done it Photoshop, but like the fact that it's sort of physical, the fact that these things exist as physical objects feels important to me, and it feels like the process is about sort of it's a bit like an impression of something. The difference between an impression and impersonation, like an impression, you kind of know that someone is pretending to be something else, whereas an impersonation is like they are trying to fool you. So I'm not trying to fool anyone, I'm trying to use the language of imagery, and the language is sort of what constitutes imagery, and sort of turn that into sort of objects. That's the three of them together. And this piece was also in the sort of same show that some of this work was into together. This is a sort of image of a bunch of sort of it's actually a bunch of sort of surfaces in the studio, a bunch of MDF surfaces built together, but then presented sort of mounted on this block of MDF, and using the shadow of the light that you see in the corner there to create the rest of the frame. So if you turn the light off, that sort of dark edge that you see around the top of the frame there, and on the top and on the right, that disappears. That's that shadow, and the sandy coloured edge is a sort of beveled edge of the MDF that the thing is mounted on. So it's a sort of conflation of these, of the photograph and the object, and sort of space in the world. And also that this kind of led to things that were slightly sort of less representational. This is sort of felt like a little bit of a kind of bridging image for me, in the sense that I've been working quite specifically with things that you knew what they were, or like where their place in the world was, these like tools and swords and axes. And this is a sort of installation that was done last year and presented at Unseen Festival. I wanted to kind of push the imagery, sort of like how I worked, how I used images, sort of, rather than always sort of relating to the things in the world. In this setup, what became quite a big installation for me. It was about sort of giving equal weight to the image and the formal components of the image, and the kind of poetic reading of the image, and the material properties of the image, like blending them all in together. So this is sort of originally, it's like when I was making a lot of that other work, there was a lot of sort of, I suppose, failed experiments, attempts to kind of go somewhere, startings, endings, they're all sort of going up on my studio wall. And And the whole time I was making some of these other more kind of concise projects, I kept looking up at the wall thinking, God, there's something going on there. I don't entirely get what it is, but I like that. And sense that sometimes when you kind of go to try and contain something, you sort of kill it off, or you make it too neat, or you package it too much. There was something happening there that inspired me, and as soon as I kind of got this particular exhibition away, I went back to these and started looking at the kind of the pattern that had kind of grown on the wall, and sort of seeing that as something that contained a lot of ideas that I'd been working with, interest in sort of form and objects, and pushing for me, pushing the sort of the more sort of symbolic or poetic sort of associations of an image into sort of my own practice. Lots of people probably don't have any problems with doing things like that. I find that I kind of tend to work in a particular way, and then I need to do something to kind of shift it, because I get like locked into doing landscapes, or I get locked into doing animals, and in my mind then I need to kind of, I've got to try and do something to kind of like shift that sort of balance before I kind of paint myself into a corner and I don't know what to do anymore. And this for me was a way of doing that. It was a way of allowing something to be a lot broader as a sort of piece, and to allow for sort of different kind of readings across the work. And then the installation of this became a lot about the sort of formal properties of the frames and how the frames interacted with the images. The term metalepsis is a literary term about metaphor used metaphorically. It's kind of ambiguous. But I really liked, also in narratology, it's about sort of like the breaking in of kind of different narrative levels. So like if you have a kind of narrator that breaks into the story that they're telling and appears to sort of disrupt, doesn't belong in that narrative world, and then they kind of break in. So it's like this idea that sort of the frames as objects kind of break into the sort of the way that the images are made, and the sort of things kind of quote and reappear and re-quote themselves. The way the kind of frames sort of stack up on each other, like the two on the far side there, sort of mirrors or echoes something of the way that the block in the image rests on the edge of a kind of plinth. So a sort of a kind of poetic and a formal and a kind of sort of material kind of readings that all kind of trying to combine into one, so to the point where you don't sort of have a sort of direct purpose, but you have this sense of looping. So like, you know, there's I was going to say, who is it there? It's Jesus there praying. The picture of Jesus in the middle there is being framed by the other images, and the gap in the frames, like they all frame that one. And the two sort of long ones in the middle are the same shape as the bigger one on the right there. So there's a continual sort of self-repetition, self-referentiality sort of going on in them. It's a quick sort of guide through a couple of the images themselves, like this one that appears in there is then reprinted as a photograph with a block laid on top of it and photographed again. And then that picture then joins to another where the block becomes a shadow that obscures the head of the statue next to it. So it's like re-quoting the same image, re-photographing, re-quoting, adding kind of material layers to it. And the thing, like I was talking about, sort of painting myself into kind of corners, what I'd sort of round about this time, I was sort of in this, almost everything had been studio bound for a long time, and was becoming increasingly more studio bound. There's a lot of images that I haven't put in here that's just basically like rectangles and breeze blocks, and me getting to the point where I think I don't want to photograph anything anymore. It's like subject matter itself is just, is annoying. It's like I wish I was a painter that could just go out and make something up and sort of, not need there to be something that exists first, because everything that exists first is already something. It's already got all its own associations, and when I take something from the world and photograph it, you take all these associations that it already has, unless you kind of play with processes. And it's like I've always kind of shied away from sort of playing with processes, because at the same time I want to sort of be true to the way the medium works, which is its ability to interact with the world as the world is, but then I kind of find that equally frustrating at the same time. So then this one particular image that was in the set sort of was very inspiring to me, because it had allowed me to actually get out and photograph something outside of my studio. And and in order to kind of push that part of my process, or my part of my kind of creative process, sort of takes me to where I am at the moment in the work, which is like last year. I went out to the desert, sort of a few hours outside of Cairo, and photographed a lot of these like natural rock formations that exist out there. The project's taken quite a long time. It's sort of like coming together. It's close to coming together, but it's not totally there. So I'll be even vaguer than I have been when talking about it. It's called The Erratics, and it sort of combines a selection of these images that I brought back from Egypt, which kind of follow the aesthetic that I'd sort of taken and my continual obsession with rocks that has developed, as you may or may not have noticed in the course of the work, as sort of ready-made objects as well as sculptural things. It's like there's not that many things in the world that count as being sort of just natural objects. Everything is a sort of, obviously rocks are a part of something else, but at the same time they're a kind of entity in themselves. They've got like there's no design around them. They form by breakage and erosion and time. They're kind of fascinating as sort of these natural sculptural things, as sort of obvious ready-mades, if you like. So I photographed a bunch of these in the desert, and then came back and freaked out with a whole bunch of negatives that I didn't know what to do with, and spent the best part of the last sort of year sort of trying to work in response to these. I've gradually begun sort of collecting chalk. These are all chalk formations in the desert, and I've been collecting chalk from cliff falls, and began sort of shaping them myself, so like carving sort of planes into them, and cutting them, and putting them alongside, not specifically pairing up with, but just sort of mixing them in with these natural forms. So they become about sort of study of kind of surface and the way that the photographic process translates everything to surface. So sort of study of natural surfaces and kind of created surfaces. You can sort of see that. You can see that sort of naturally going on. And I had a point with like this image for me was when I came back from with a whole bunch of negatives to the desert. This is the one image that kind of for me at the time epitomised everything that had gone wrong about the trip. Because to me it felt like, there's like drama and there's light and there's movement. This is a proper photograph. I didn't do proper photographs, and I felt kind of embarrassed about the fact that I had a proper photograph. And then it was for some reason they're all like these they're all 5:4 things. So I had a kind of contact print of this, and I've been using it as my bookmark for the past year. And so every day I was seeing this image, the one that I was sort of initially embarrassed by. And the more I saw it, the more I thought, God, I love that picture. And then it got to the point where I thought, I just really like that picture. That's exactly what I went out to. That's exactly what I tried to do. I went out specifically to make images. I've been in the studio and I've been trying to crop these and scratch these and tear these and do all sorts of things to these to kind of try and make them be something else. And then for me in my process, it felt like actually this is exactly what they should be. This is about them being images. This is about the fact that I went somewhere else and I created images. It's probably what everyone does all the time, but for me it seemed like a big deal. So this idea that now I've begun sort of shaping that, accepting the fact that I translated these things in the desert to surface. I've been kind of pushing the sculptures towards surface by kind of creating shapes and planes in them that then link up with the kind of plinths that they're on, and shaping the actual objects towards becoming images themselves, as if sort of trying to sort of push the two-dimensional into the three-dimensional, or prepare them for their translation into surface. So the project has become about these things, the way that the photograph translates one thing to surface, and the way that I'm pushing the sort of sculptured objects towards surfaces, and sort of blending them into these kind of planes and lines. And then ideally, it's going to sort of push. It's kind of pushing my parts of my image and object kind of parts of the process a bit further by wholeheartedly embracing the images, and also embracing things that are kind of purely sculptural. So I've got a couple of pictures. These aren't photographs. Not that makes any sense, but these will be objects in the exhibition. So there will be sort of objects that they'll be different to the ones that are in the photographs. Some of the photographs have been shaped. Some of the objects, have been shaped to become specific photographs. some of them are to stand alone as objects, like this one, the sort of two-dimensional shapes that are carved into the chalk. It's a way of kind of conflating the two-dimensional and the three-dimensional as objects, and then some as images. And then the final part that I'm working on at the moment involves images like laying flat on tables with glass on them, so like bringing the sort of glass of the frames, if you like, almost, and the material kind of components of the frame images, and making them part of the sort of physical process. So these are just like each one has got 2 sheets of glass. This is a Photoshop mock-up, but I have made these and they look pretty much like that. So the rocks are photographed, the glass is sort of 2 sheets laid on top, and extending the lines, and extending the kind of the natural forms and the kind of created, abstracted forms out of the images. And I think that's the last one. Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just really interested in how the sort of photographic element and the sculptural elements are sort of evolved together. Did you start out one day picking up a camera, or did you come to your art more from hands-on, from sculpting? At what point did they start to kind of come together? Was there one and then the other, or was it always they were together for you?
Well, I did photography as a A-level and a foundation course like ages ago, before Photoshop was really out there. And in my A-level, I was doing art and photography as 2 separate subjects. It was quite early on when there wasn't revealing some age here, but when there weren't that many photography courses, and it was a new course, and I kind of chose that as the whichever kind of fill up my time course. And I was getting really, kind of ironically probably, my art was all about copying things perfectly, like doing like pencil drawings and like copying things. My photography was all about like pushing all the kind of processes and like experimenting with everything, and messing things up in the darkroom and putting like every type of substance I could over negatives, and like breaking and pouring chemicals all over everything, and everything was so kind of experimental. And I did really well in photography as a result of that. But that was all kind of that was all like pre-Photoshop days, and I think there's a long period where I kind of went away from it, and then so I'd had this sort of background of trying to kind of push against the photograph and not being like that happy with, or just sort of personally not feeling sort of content with what the photograph was in itself. And then when I kind of came back to it, like those types of things that I'd been doing before, like they were kind of redundant. Photoshop felt like it blew a lot of that away. It didn't make that necessary anymore, because no one would come up to me and go, "Oh, wow, how did you do that?" Because like everyone knew you could Photoshop anything. So you know, there's still plenty of ways of using processes that are interesting. But for me, I felt like a different sort of relationship sort of grew with the photograph, and being more kind of aware of its constructed nature made me want to sort of bring other things into it, in a sense, still try and be kind of true to essentially what photography offered in its ability to show you something. And whereas when I was younger, I just wanted to kind of push that and break that all the time. I felt like I sort of had this, it always feels a bit like a love-hate relationship. It's like, okay, I'll try and take good photographs, and sort of I'll try and be honest to what the camera is sort of set up to do. But I want to sort of bring something else into that. I want to sort of find other ways that I can kind of work with that, and sort of I feel like this sort of reciprocal relationship with the world, where it's like let the kind of camera do its thing, and try and do my own thing too. If that makes any sense.
Do you think of what you do as photographs or more as sculptures, or is it not so distinct between the two?
It's all pretty much well. I mean, some of them now are sort of definitely kind of sculptures, but I'm aware that I haven't trained in the language of sculpture, so my referencing and my trajectory is photographic. So I approach the sculpture from the perspective of photography. So I mean, on the RCA course that I did, we were still medium specific as an MA, which apparently is about to change, and I think it seems a kind of a shame. A lot of the MA courses are just fine art. So in the sort of fine art specialisms in London, a lot of them are just fine art, so Goldsmith and Slade and things. You can do photography, but it's just mixed in with fine art. I think there's something interesting that happens when you have sort of parameters or a context to your medium, and then the things that you do are sort of in relationship to that. Or maybe that's just me, maybe I feel like it's helpful to have something to kind of work against or in response to. So if just the possibility of fine art is a bit daunting, it's like you can do absolutely anything you like, and I don't know what to do. So they're sort of being a kind of photography as the sort of language that I feel like I know and that I'm in relationship with, but not entirely sort of comfortable with. And I don't feel entirely comfortable in a photographic context because I feel it's too narrow, but then I want the sort of broadness of sort of other approaches and other sort of ideas, and I certainly find a lot more influence and inspiration outside of photography in kind of like art kind of theory or exhibitions.
Thank you, that's really interesting. Thanks.
Someone texted me. Hi. Sorry, I can't hear.
Did you ever work with people rather than objects?
Once
Did
more.
you ever work with people rather than objects in your work?
No, I haven't done really, other than sort of bringing the representation of a few people, like the sort of Jesus figure and stuff into that other one, but I haven't done people. I'm not saying I won't, because I could easily. Certainly at the moment, I feel like that sort of relationship of the object and sort of the kind of correlation between the photograph as an object sort of suits an approach to materials and processes that I find interesting. I kind of feel, for me personally, as soon as there's people involved, there's a sense of sort of empathy or sort of commonality with whatever the person is doing that takes me away from the idea that I'm kind of more of an abstracted or sort of conceptual idea that I'm interested in. But that's not. I'm not saying that's what that work does. It's kind of what it does for me at the moment. But I'll be happy to if I can find a way to. But it's not necessarily something I'm looking to do.